Search for the types of jinn and you will be told there are 6, or 7, or 10. You will get lists with names attached, each one with an assigned rank and an assigned power, presented as though they were transmitted knowledge. Those lists are everywhere. They are confidently delivered, and they disagree with each other about almost everything. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, named 3 in a single narration, with 3 categories that are described by what the beings do rather than by what they are called. And that narration is authentic. Not weak, not contested, not one of the borderline reports this channel usually has to spend 10 minutes grading. It was authenticated by Ibn Hibban, by Al-Hakim, by Ad-Dahabi, and by Al-Albani, which is about as clean a chain of endorsement as this subject ever produces. So, the situation is unusual. On most topics like this, the popular version is elaborate, and the authentic version is thin. Here, the authentic version exists. It is sound, it is specific, and almost nobody has heard it, because it has been buried under a taxonomy that nobody can source. That is worth stating clearly at the start, because it changes what this video is. This is not one of those episodes where the honest answer is that we do not know. On this question, we do know. The answer was preserved, and it is 3. We are going to do the sound version properly, and then we are going to trace where the invented one came from. And there is a reason to care about this beyond accuracy. The invented taxonomy is not harmless decoration. Once you believe there are 6 kinds of these beings with assigned ranks and assigned powers, you have a framework that makes a person feel surrounded and outmatched, and that framework is the raw material for a great deal of fear and for a great deal of exploitation of frightened people. The authentic material does not produce that feeling. It is calm, it is short, and by the end of this video, you will see why. Start with what they are made of, because the Quran is precise about it, and the material explains the categories. Chapter 55, Ar-Rahman, verse 15. And he created the jinn from a smokeless flame of fire. The Arabic is marriage min nar. Marriage carries the sense of something mixed, moving, unsettled, not a steady flame. The part of a fire that flickers and shifts at the edge, that has no fixed outline and will not hold a shape. Chapter 15, Al-Hijr, verse 27, gives it again with a different word and adds the timing. And the jinn we created before, from scorching fire. That verse establishes they were created before human beings, which Ibn Kathir glosses in 4 words as before creating humans. And a narration in Sahih Muslim sets all 3 creations side by side. The angels were created from light. The jinn were created from a smokeless flame of fire. And Adam was created from what has been described to you. 3 creations, 3 materials, and the middle one is the only one that is inherently unstable. Think about the 3 as a set. Light does not change and has no location you can point at. Clay is inert and stays exactly where you put it. And between them sits the only one of the 3 that will not sit still. Fire has no fixed boundary, consumes what it touches, and takes a different shape every second you look at it. That is the material the jinn were made from, and the Quran specifies the most unstable part of it, not the coal, not the heat, the flickering edge. Hold that, because it is going to explain the classification. A being made of something that does not hold a fixed form is going to be classified by behavior rather than by appearance, and that is precisely what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did. Here is the narration. It comes from Abu Thalaba al-Kushani. May Allah be pleased with him. The Messenger of God, peace be upon him, said that the jinn are of 3 types. A type that has wings, and they fly through the air. A type in the form of snakes and dogs, and a type that settles in a place and then moves on. That is the entire classification. 3 clauses, 1 sentence. Notice what is missing from that sentence before we do anything else. There are no names. Not one of the 3 categories is given a title. The Prophet, peace be upon him, did not say the first type is called such and such. He described what it does. There is no hierarchy either. The 3 are listed without any indication that one outranks another, is stronger than another, or is more dangerous than another. They are simply 3, and there is no count of how many belong to each. No population, no proportion, nothing. Now, before we take the categories apart, let me give you the grading properly, because this is the part that separates this video from every other one on this subject. The narration is recorded by al-Tahawi in Shar Mushkil al-Athar as Hadith 2941. It is in Sahih Ibn Hibban as Hadith 6156. It is in Al-Hakim's Mustadrak, and it is in Al-Tabarani's Al-Mujam al-Kabir. Ibn Hibban included it in a collection whose entire premise is authenticity. Al-Hakim declared it sound. Ad-Dahabi, who is famous precisely for being harder on Al-Hakim's gradings than Al-Hakim was on himself, agreed with him here. Al-Albani stated that it was reported with a Sahih chain. When Ad-Dahabi agrees with Al-Hakim, that is worth noting on its own, because a great deal of Ad-Dahabi's reputation rests on the number of times he did not. He went through Al-Hakim's collection systematically and corrected a large amount of it. On this one, he let it stand. Modern hadith specialists have reached the same place. The narration has been described as strong in its chain by Shu'aib al-Arnaut, and Ibn Abd al-Barr described it as good. So you have a report authenticated across several centuries by scholars working independently, in different regions, with different methodological temperaments, and all of them landing in the same place. So this is not a report we are stretching to accept. It clears the bar comfortably from several directions at once. Now the three categories, and look carefully at how they are organized. The first is a type with wings that flies through the air. That is a category defined by mobility, not by malevolence, not by power, not by rank. What distinguishes this group is how they move. The second is a type in the form of snakes and dogs. This one is the most misunderstood, and it is worth slowing down. The narration is not saying that snakes and dogs are jinn. It is describing a category of jinn capable of appearing in those forms. The distinction matters enormously, and collapsing it produces a great deal of unnecessary cruelty toward animals. The classical scholars were careful about this. The related material treats the appearance of these forms as something that can occur, not as a statement that ordinary creatures are anything other than ordinary creatures. Your neighbor's dog is a dog, and it is worth asking why those two animals specifically. Both were familiar to the audience being addressed. Both are found around human dwellings rather than in remote places, and both can appear without warning in a space you thought was yours. The two forms named are not exotic. They are the ordinary and the close, which fits the pattern of the whole classification because nothing in it is designed to impress. And the third is a type that settles in a place and then moves on. Read that again, because it is the strangest of the three and the one nobody talks about. In Arabic, the two verbs are the ones used for a traveling people making camp and then striking camp, halting and departing. It is the vocabulary of a caravan. So the third category is defined by not staying, a presence that occupies a place for a period and then is gone, described in the plainest possible terms, using the vocabulary of ordinary travel. There is nothing supernatural in the phrasing at all. If you did not know what was being described, that clause could be about a family moving between grazing grounds. Now step back and look at the shape of the whole classification. One moves through the air, one takes on forms, one settles and departs. Every single category is a description of motion or of appearance, and not one of them is a name, a title, a rank, or a power level. That is a functional classification. It tells you how these beings relate to physical space, and it tells you nothing else, because nothing else was disclosed. It is also, notably, not a complete map. Nothing in the narration claims that every jinn falls into exactly one of these three. The sentence says, the jinn are of three types, which is a statement about categories that exist rather than a filing system with no leftovers. That is a subtle difference, and it matters, because a taxonomy claims completeness, and this does not. And that restraint is what makes it credible. A fabricated taxonomy gives you hierarchy, because hierarchy is what makes a taxonomy entertaining. This one gives you three modes of movement and stops. Ask yourself what you would invent if you were making this up. You would name them, you would rank them, you would say which was the most dangerous and which the most powerful, because those are the details an audience wants, and they cost nothing to supply. The narration supplies none of them, and it was in circulation among people who would have found the missing details as interesting as you do, because here is what that narration does not tell you, and what the Quran does. The Hadith classifies them physically. It says nothing about what kind of beings they are morally, And that turns out to be the far more important question, and the Quran devotes an entire chapter to it. Chapter 72 is called Al-Jinn. It is named for them, and most of it is their own reported speech. It opens with the Prophet, peace be upon him, being instructed to say that it was revealed to him that a group of the Jinn listened, and that they said they had heard an amazing recitation that guides to right conduct, and that they had believed in it, and would never associate anyone with their Lord. They believed. That is the first thing the chapter tells you about them, and it is the first thing in the chapter at all. Consider the editorial decision in that. A whole chapter of the Quran is named for these beings, and its opening move is to report a group of them accepting guidance. Not their powers, not their forms, not what they can do to a person, their belief. And then it gets more specific, and this is the passage that should end the entire folklore version of this subject. Verse 11. And among us are the righteous, and among us are otherwise, we were of differing ways. Verse 14. And among us are Muslims, and among us are the unjust. So whoever has become Muslim has sought out right guidance. Read those two verses again, and notice what they are doing. This is a population describing itself, and the description is a range. Some righteous, some not. Some who submitted, some who did not. Differing ways. That is exactly what you would say about human beings. Word for word, the description would fit any population of people anywhere. And it means the single most common assumption about the Jinn is simply wrong. They are not a category of evil. They are not demons by definition, and the tradition does not treat them that way. Iblis is a Jinn, and Al-Kahf verse 50 states it directly, but the relationship there runs the way it runs with us. One member of a species rebelled. That does not define the species. There are Muslim Jinn. The Quran says so in their own words, in a chapter named after them, in verses that are among the least quoted in the entire book relative to how often the subject comes up. And the chapter goes further than stating it. It records them saying that when they heard the guidance, they believed in it, and that whoever believes in his Lord will fear neither loss nor burden. It records them describing their own former state, that they used to think no one would ever speak a lie about God, and that they had sat in positions in the heavens for listening, and found those positions now guarded. That is a community discovering that something has changed and revising accordingly. It is not the behavior of a category of monsters. Now the accountability, which follows from that and which the Quran is equally direct about. Chapter 51, verse 56. And I did not create the Jinn and mankind except to worship me. The two are named together, in one sentence, with one stated purpose. Not as separate projects, but as two creations with the same assignment. And the order in that verse is worth noticing. The Jinn are named first. They were created first, and in the verse stating the purpose of both, they are mentioned first. Chapter 6, verse 130, addresses them together as well, asking whether messengers did not come to them from among themselves, reciting the verses and warning of the meeting of this day. And chapter 37, verse 158, states that the Jinn certainly know that they will be brought for account. There is also the account of how a group of them first encountered the Quran, which is in chapter 46. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was reciting at a place called Nakhla, and a group of Jinn was directed toward him and listened. When it concluded, they went back to their people as warners, and the chapter records what they said, that they had heard a book revealed after Musa, confirming what came before it and guiding to the truth. They heard it, they understood it, and they went and told others. That is the entire episode, and it is the closest thing in the sources to a formal introduction between the two species. Chapter 72 also records them stating that among them are those who submitted and those who deviated, and that the ones who deviated became firewood for hell. Their own account includes their own consequences. So the picture is complete, and it is consistent. A created species, made before us, from a different material, with moral agency, addressed by revelation, capable of belief and disbelief, and answerable for it. That is a very different thing from a bestiary. And it changes what the whole subject is for. A bestiary exists to be looked at. What the Quran actually presents is a parallel accountable creation, which is not an object of curiosity so much as a fact that ought to reframe how you think about your own situation. Two species, one instruction, one accounting. There is one more consequence of accountability that follows and is rarely drawn out. If they are answerable, then they are limited. A being that will be brought to account is a being operating inside rules, with a range of permitted action and a record being kept. Whatever the Jinn are, they are not outside the system. They are inside it on the same terms we are, which is the least frightening fact available about them, and almost never the one anyone leads with. And notice how it reframes the three categories we just walked through. Those categories describe how these beings move. They say nothing about whether any individual among them is righteous or corrupt, because movement is not a moral property. A being with wings and a being that takes forms are both, on the Quran's account, capable of being among the righteous or among the unjust. The physical classification and the moral one are completely independent, and the folklore versions almost always merge them, which is how you end up with lists where each type has an assigned level of evil. Quick word before we continue. If this is landing for you, take a second to subscribe and hit that like button. It genuinely moves this channel forward more than you would think. And I want your answer in the comments on this one, because I think it is the real question underneath this subject. Why do you think the invented version is always more detailed than the authentic one? Not just here. It happens across every topic on this channel. Is it that people want more, or that confident detail simply spreads better than honest limits? Tell me what you think. I read them all. Then stay with me, because we are about to trace where 6 types and 10 types actually came from, and then look at the one Jinn the sound narrations say is assigned to you personally. Back to the lists. The expanded lists usually run something like this: Marid, Ifrit, Ghul, Silat, Yan, and then whatever the particular version wants to add to reach its number. Sometimes with attributes attached. This one is bound to water, that one to ruins, another to travelers. There is no chain for any of it. There is no narration, sound, or week, in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, sets out a classification of 6 or 7 or 10 types. What exists is a set of Arabic words, some of them in the Quran and some of them in pre-Islamic poetry and later literature, which have been gathered up and arranged into a system that nobody transmitted. And the way to see this clearly is to look at how 2 of those words are actually used, because they are in the Quran, and their usage settles the question. Take Ifrit first. The word appears in the Quran once. It is used to describe a being who spoke in the court of Suleiman, and the phrasing is an Ifrit among the Jinn. That is, the construction, not an Ifrit, as though naming a species, but an Ifrit from among them, as a description applied to one individual. The word in Arabic carries the sense of powerful, strong, formidable. It is a descriptive adjective functioning as a noun, the way you might call someone a heavyweight. It describes the individual's capacity, and the verse then has him say exactly that about himself, that he is strong for the task and trustworthy. So Ifrit in the Quran is a description of one being's strength. It is not a species name, and the verse does not treat it as one. Now take Marid. That word appears in chapter 37, describing every rebellious devil. The root carries rebellion, insolence, refusing to submit. Again, a descriptive term, and again applied as a characteristic rather than as a classification. So both of the words that anchor the popular taxonomy are, in their actual Quranic usage, adjectives. One means formidable, the other means rebellious. And notice that the second one is not even applied to a jinn in that verse. It is applied to a devil, a shaitan, which is its own term. The word marid is describing a quality of rebelliousness rather than identifying a member of a species. Turning those into 2 of 6 types is like taking the words tall and stubborn and announcing that humanity is divided into 6 species, of which 2 are the talls and the stubborns. That is the whole trick, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It also explains why the lists never agree with each other. If the categories had been transmitted, every version would carry the same names in the same order, because that is what transmission does. Instead, the lists vary by source, by region, and by how many the particular teller wants. Some have 5, some have 7, some have 10. The names shift, and the assigned powers shift. Variation of that kind is the signature of material that was assembled rather than received. Silat and Jan are worth a word as well, since they fill out most versions of the list. Jan is a Quranic word, but it is used as a general term for the jinn as a category, including in the verse we opened with about their creation. Making it one type among several inverts the relationship, because it is the word for the whole rather than a name for a part. Silat comes from the same folkloric stock as the next one. Ghoul is a different case again. That word comes from pre-Islamic Arabian folklore, where it named a creature of the wilderness that misled travelers. It is old, it is genuinely part of the region's story stock, and it long predates any Islamic classification. There is a narration in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, addressed belief in the ghoul, and the material there runs in the direction of dampening the fear attached to it rather than confirming a taxonomy. And there is a wider point in that, which recurs across every subject on this channel. Arabia before and during the Revelation had a rich and ancient body of stories about unseen beings, as every culture on earth does. That material did not evaporate. It sat alongside the new revelation, and over centuries some of it drifted across the line and acquired a religious label it never had. The tradition built tools precisely for detecting that drift, and this is a textbook case for them. So the lists are built out of three kinds of material: Quranic adjectives treated as species names, folkloric words absorbed from the surrounding culture, and additions from the later literary tradition, in which stories about jinn became an entire genre of entertainment. None of that is transmitted knowledge. Some of it is beautiful writing, and the literary tradition it comes from is a genuine achievement that nobody should be embarrassed about. None of it is a hadith. The mistake is not that these stories exist, it is that they were relabeled. A body of imaginative literature got presented as a body of religious knowledge, and the relabeling happened so long ago that most people repeating it have no idea a relabeling occurred. And this is where the contrast becomes stark. The authentic classification has three categories: no names, no ranks, and no powers. The popular one has 6 or more, all named, all ranked, and all with assigned abilities. The difference in detail is not a difference in knowledge. It runs the other way, and this is the single most useful idea in this video. The invented version is more detailed precisely because nothing was constraining it. A person transmitting is limited to what reached them. A person composing is limited by nothing at all. So on any subject where the sources are careful, the unsourced version will always be richer, more vivid, and more satisfying. Richness is therefore not evidence of knowledge. On subjects like this, it is frequently evidence of the opposite, and that test will serve you well beyond this one topic. And there is one more structural point about the authentic narration that the invented versions cannot reproduce, which is what it does not license. The three categories describe how these beings move. They give you no method for identifying one, no procedure attached to any of them, and no instruction about what to do if you believe you have encountered any. That silence is not an oversight. It is consistent with how the sources handle the entire subject, which is to establish that these beings exist, establish that they are accountable, and decline to turn any of it into a practice. The invented taxonomies almost always come attached to something: a technique, a method, a service. The sound narration comes attached to nothing at all, which is one more reason to trust it. Now the last piece, and it is the one that is actually about you. There is a narration in Sahih Muslim from Abdullah ibn Masud, may Allah be pleased with him. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that there is not one of you except that a companion from among the jinn has been assigned to him. It is one of the most quietly significant narrations in the collections, and it is in Sahih Muslim, which means there is nothing to argue about regarding its status. The word is qarin. The root carries the sense of being joined to something, coupled with it, paired. The same root gives the Arabic word for a spouse's counterpart, and for things that occur together. It means the one alongside you, permanently. The companions asked him whether this applied to him as well, and he said that it did, but that God had helped him against his, so that it submitted, and that it only instructed him toward good. There are several things in that exchange worth sitting with. The first is that it is universal, not a special affliction, not a sign that something has gone wrong in a person's life, and not something that happens to some people and not others. Every human being, without exception, and the narration is explicit about it. That alone removes a great deal of anxiety, because a large amount of the fear around this subject comes from the assumption that attention from these beings is unusual and therefore means something about you. The sound narration says the opposite. It is the ordinary condition, and it has been since the first person. The second is that he included himself. He did not exempt himself from the arrangement, which he easily could have. He said his own was overcome, and the wording attributes that to help rather than to his own strength. It is a statement about assistance rather than about immunity. Consider what that does to the shame attached to this subject. If the arrangement applies to the messenger of God, peace be upon him, then it is not a mark against anyone. Nobody has one because of something they did. It is simply part of the design of a human life. And the third is the most useful thing in this entire video, so I want to be precise about it. The narration says, the Quran instructs, it whispers toward. The vocabulary throughout this subject, in the Quran and in the narrations, is consistently the vocabulary of suggestion rather than of control. The most common word for what these beings do is waswasa, which means to whisper repeatedly, the sound of something said low and again and again. A whisper is not a force. Something that whispers to you has no capacity to move your hand. And the Quran states the limit explicitly in a passage where Iblis himself is quoted describing his own position on the Day of Judgment. He says that he had no authority over them except that he called them and they responded, and he tells them not to blame him but to blame themselves. That is the accused describing the extent of his own reach, and the extent he describes is an invitation, no authority, only a call, and a response that came from the other side. Which means the entire framework of being overpowered by these beings, which the six-type taxonomy exists to support, is not the framework the sources describe. What is described is suggestion, arriving at a person who retains the ability to decline it. And that is why the invented taxonomy matters, and is not just an accuracy problem. A ranked list of powerful beings tells you that you are small and surrounded. The authentic material tells you that you are addressed, that the address is a whisper, and that the whisper can be refused. Those are opposite messages, and only one of them is transmitted. It is also worth naming who benefits from the first message, because this is where an accuracy problem becomes a harm problem. A person convinced they are surrounded by ranked and powerful beings is a person who will pay someone to make it stop. That market exists. It is large, and it runs on exactly the framework we have just traced to nowhere. The authentic material removes the foundation of that market entirely, which may be part of why it is the version nobody hears. So here is where we land. The types the Prophet, peace be upon him, named are three, and they describe movement, one that flies, one that takes on forms, one that settles and departs. That narration is authentic. Graded sound by Ibn Hibban, Al-Hakim, Ad-Dahabi, and Al-Albani. Called strong by Shu'aib al-Arnaut, and good by Ibn Abd al-Bar. That is what was named, and it is all that was named. Anyone offering you more is offering you something that was not transmitted. What the Quran adds is the part that actually matters. They were made before us, from a different material, and they are not a category of evil. Among them are the righteous, and among them are otherwise. In their own reported words, they were created for the same purpose we were, addressed by messengers, and they will be brought to account exactly as we will. And each of us has one assigned, whose method is a whisper, and whose own account of his authority is that he had none. That is the complete file. It fits in a paragraph, and everything in it is either Quranic or graded sound. Compare that against a list of 6 named types with assigned ranks and abilities. The second one is longer, more atmospheric, and easier to make a video about. The first one is true. The 6 types were invented. The 3 were narrated. And the 3 tell you less about them and more about your own position than the 6 ever could. Which brings this to the last thing. And it is the reason a subject like this belongs on a channel like this at all. If the mechanism is suggestion, then the outcome is decisions, and decisions are things people get wrong. Everyone listening to this has followed a whisper somewhere they should not have gone, and some of you are carrying the results of that right now, and have been for years. Chapter 39, verse 53. Say, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of God. Indeed, God forgives all sins. Indeed, He is the forgiving, the merciful. Notice the phrase in the middle of it, transgressed against themselves. That is how the Quran describes it, not primarily as damage done to God, who is not diminished by anything anyone does, but as damage a person does to their own position. And the verse arrives with no conditions attached about how you got there, whether you were whispered to or how many times you have been back. The Quran instructs toward one thing, that verse instructs toward another. The whole of a life sits between those two, and only one of them is described as merciful. And it is worth ending on the asymmetry there, because the numbers in this video have been going in one direction the entire time. 6 types reduced to 3. Ranks and powers reduced to descriptions of movement. Authority reduced to a whisper, by the admission of the one doing the whispering. Everything in this subject gets smaller the closer you look at it, except the last thing, which does not have a limit stated anywhere. If you want to go further into what the sources actually establish about these beings, and how one particular claim about a jinn who met every prophet was traced and rejected, that video is on this channel, and it is the natural next one to watch.